as Troy said, is going to have to go back to work and forget about the fumbles.
This was really a jam-packed week of NFL football, and today we're going to be talking about what we learned from NFL Week 4. And man, we already knew the heavily awaited matchup between the Dallas Cowboys and the Green Bay Packers, and it ended in a freaking tie. That's wild, but it was some great football being played there. 80 total points scored in that 40-40 tie. We'll talk about that more in their game ad nauseum for sure, but that was a great matchup, and Micah Parsons returned to Dallas. Dak Prescott had an amazing game, a lot of offense in that game too, but I think it lived up to the hype, all except for a winner being decided, and we have the first tie in the NFL game since the 2022 season, so that's something to talk about there. Then you had the Kansas City Chiefs really blow out the Baltimore Ravens. That's more of an indictment on the Ravens in this game too. Lamar Jackson suffered a hamstring injury in the matchup. Patrick Mahomes got his first 4 passing touchdown game since October of 2023. The offense looked to be clicking in the return of Xavier Worthy, so that was a great jolt for them. The Giants got an upset win over the Los Angeles Chargers in the first start in the Jackson Dart era. It's Dart time there in New York, and that was a great win that I think really re-energized, reinvigorated the fan base there. Then you had matches like the Texans finally getting their first win of the season. The Patriots destroying the Panthers. The Jaguars defeating the 49ers, the Lions blowing out the Browns, in a really good Sunday afternoon matchup between the Los Angeles Rams and the Indianapolis Colts. That saw the Colts finally lose their first game, but they had a lot of opportunities to win, and then Matthew Stafford had a great 80-yard touchdown pass to Tutu Atwell to essentially win the game. Just a lot of great football being played, guys, and then we followed that up with 2 Monday Night Football matchups between the Dolphins and the Jets, and then finally with the game between the Denver Broncos and the Cincinnati Bengals. Like I said, man, a jam-packed weekend of really good football, high-level football being played, still certainly early in the season, but just a lot of intriguing storylines to talk about, and I can't wait to talk about every single game individually more thoroughly. But with that being said though, guys, before we get further into this NFL Week 4 recap, make sure that you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. Follow me on Instagram /Twitter and X at SwaggyRuss, and TikTok at SwaggyRuss2 for shorts, reels, content, all things to that nature. This is Week 4. Stay tuned for also the Power Rankings video that I'll have soon, ranking teams going into NFL Week 5, and also I'll talk about it more later in this video in the outro, but the NBA season is starting soon, and we're gonna have NBA season previews coming too as well for the top contenders in the league too, so stay tuned for that. But with all that being said though, guys, let's talk about furthermore what we learned from NFL Week 4. Starting off Week 4, we had a classic NFC West matchup between the Seattle Seahawks and the Arizona Cardinals, and the Seattle Seahawks were able to win this game in a game-winning field goal fashion, winning 23-20. But overall, especially in the first half, the Seahawks dominated, winning 14-3. The Cardinals, they were able to come back in the second half a little bit after a couple of arid first half interceptions from Kyler Murray, but I will say, especially the one from the Marvin Harrison Jr. drop, that was not on him, and you can make the argument that the other one was from Marvin Harrison Jr. not completing his route. But one takeaway that I have from a Cardinals perspective before getting into the Seahawks is that their offensive play calling, or really just their scheme, isn't necessarily the greatest, and it's a shame because you see playmakers like a Trey McBride, who maybe in this game didn't have the greatest game as he only had 7 receptions for 52 receiving yards, but he's one of the top, in my opinion, 3 to 5 tight ends in the league. And then they have weapons like a Marvin Harrison Jr., who in the first half it wasn't great. I think he was still having some confidence issues, as we all saw, but you saw the relief and emotion as he scored their receiving touchdown in the game. He had 6 receptions for 66 receiving yards in that touchdown in the second half. This offensive system hasn't necessarily been the greatest. Maybe it's because of the lack of protection, because Kyler Murray was sacked 6 times in this game. I mean, there were several scenarios and snaps where the Seahawks, they had immediate pressure on Kyler Murray, and he was having to scramble for his life, either throwing the ball away or scrambling for no gain or a loss, and it was not great to see, especially in the first half. But in the second half, like I said, they were able to get things going. But the Seahawks, though, on the flip side, really they played in rhythm. And yeah, there was a few plays where the Cardinals played solid. I think the Cardinals have a sneaky solid defense as well too. But Sam Darnold continues throughout this 2025 season, and as we saw with the Vikings last year, to be clean and efficient and really be a point guard distributing in this system now under offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak, who has really implemented his system at a high level. And Sam Darnold in this matchup, he completed 18 out of his 26 passing attempts for 242 passing yards and 1 touchdown. Was able to spread the ball around to an extent. Jackson Smith-Njigba, maybe in the first half he didn't, I believe, have more than 1 target or something like that, but in the second half he was able to get more things going, having 4 receptions for 79 receiving yards. AJ Barner had the receiving touchdown, and Zach Charbonnet had the rushing touchdown, and Kenneth Walker also played, I would say, solid. Had 19 carries for 81 rushing yards too in this game. Just, I love what I saw from his team. Like I said, defensively, the Seahawks sacked Kyler Murray 6 times. Ernest Jones had an interception, and so did Kobe Bryant. I just love what this defense is looking like in the second year under the regime of head coach Mike McDonald. Mind you, players like Naaman Moore is out right now. They're just going to have more reinforcements, and they have Devon Witherspoon, who was very stifling in their secondary. Uchenna Nwosu, who had 2 sacks in this game. Leonard Williams had a sack and a half, and Drake Thomas too as well. They're a very dominant defense, and I love what I've seen from them, and they now have a 3-1 record, and you can make the argument honestly that this NFC West division is the most competitive in football. I mean, the Cardinals, while they started off 2-0, you can make the argument that they were 2 weak wins against the Saints and the Panthers, but I think that the Cardinals, they can be a solid team, but like I said, their offense needs adjustments for sure. But for the Seahawks, man, they're continuing to thrive. Love what I've seen from their offense, being poised and a lot of condensed formations, things of that nature too. Cooper Kupp, I think him just being on the field, maybe being in blocking scenarios, not necessarily having the most receiving yards as he is older and things of that nature too, but I think he's been a great boost to this offense, and just overall, they've been able to click, and they advanced to a 3-1 record, and they'll have an intriguing matchup in Week 5 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now on to Sunday for some early morning football here in the States, but of course the matchup overseas in Dublin, Ireland between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Minnesota Vikings. And the Steelers won this game 24-21, close at the end, but in the first half, really the Steelers defense dominated, and I think some of the biggest players from this game was a DK Metcalf, who had a huge first half, 5 receptions for 126 receiving yards and a touchdown. Aaron Rodgers was clean and efficient, completing 18 out of his 22 passing attempts for 200 passing yards and a touchdown. And Kenneth Gainwell stepped in the running back 1 role since Jalen Warren was out, and he played really effective, scored the first touchdown in the game. And overall, he had 19 carries, 99 rushing yards, and 2 touchdowns. It's a great and balanced performance from this Pittsburgh Steelers team, who, I'm not gonna lie, I thought the Vikings defense was gonna dominate and thrive in this game, and they had their moments, but Aaron Rodgers escaped the game turnover 3, even though in the first half he almost had a fumble. It was recovered by a fellow offensive lineman on the Steelers. And really, I think this Vikings team, even though things weren't smooth with JJ McCarthy starting, I think you're starting to see why Carson Wentz has been a solidified backup for the past few years now, as he had to drop back in his game, and yes, he threw for 350 passing yards, but he had to throw 46 times, and he completed 30 out of his 46 passing attempts for 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. This game also saw the return of a Jordan Addison, who served a 3-game suspension, and he was really effective in his matchup. Him and Justin Jefferson thrived today, but overall it wasn't enough. But Jets, he had 10 receptions for 126 receiving yards, and then Jordan Addison had 4 receptions for 114 receiving yards, and Xavier Scott had 6 receptions for 43 receiving yards and a touchdown, and Jalen Naylor had a receiving touchdown as well too. So there was a lot of balance on both sides for both teams. A really good matchup, I think, for this NFL Week 4 game. It's a timetable of JJ McCarthy. They are expecting him to return soon in the next few weeks, hopefully. This Minnesota Vikings team is now 2-2, and the Steelers are now 3-1, and I just love how the Steelers defense looked in this game. It seems like they've been a little bit different. We're accustomed to the Steelers, being a defense that it's not necessarily been not break, but they're really physical in the trenches, things of that nature too. But they really created a lot of turnovers, like I mentioned. Turnover Carson Wentz 2 times, and even though it got called back, Jalen Ramsey had a fumble recovery for a touchdown, but of course it didn't count. But that would have been the Steelers' first touchdown in the game. So I loved how both teams looked in this performance. Just an overall, like I said, great matchup to start the Sunday slate of football for NFL Week 4, and the Steelers were able to get their 3rd win of the season, moving on to a 3-1 record. After being embarrassed in Week 3 in a matchup against the Carolina Panthers, the Falcons looked to bounce back, and they did, beating the Washington Commanders 34-27 at home. And man, a lot of people ate in this game, including Drake London, who had 95 receiving yards and a touchdown in the first half. And in this game, he had 8 receptions for 110 receiving yards and a touchdown. And I think really, from the Falcons standpoint, a great improvement that you like to see is Michael Penix Jr., who had a great bounce back game in this performance after throwing 2 interceptions and a pick 6 against the Panthers in Week 3. In this matchup against the Commanders, he completed 20 out of his 26 passing attempts for 313 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and only 1 pick. Overall, was able to distribute it to his weapons, like I talked about with Drake London having a 110 receiving yards performance, but also Bijan Robinson in a running game, and as a receiver, he went off, accounting for a total of 181 yards total on 17 carries for 75 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. And then receiving wise, had 4 receptions for 106 receiving yards. He's been a huge weapon in the receiving game throughout his career, but especially this season, even further emphasized. Then Kyle Pitts, he had 5 receptions for 70 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown, and Tyler Algier had 16 carries for 51 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their defense looked really good as well too. Xavier Watts had an interception. They sacked Marcus Mariota 2 times, and Marcus Mariota, he had 2 touchdowns in this game, but it wasn't really a great performance in the passing game for the Commanders. Mariota completed 16 out of his 27 passing attempts for 156 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Rushing wise, the Commanders only accounted for 138 rushing yards, and the leading rusher was Chris Rodriguez for 7 carries and 59 rushing rushing yards, and Deebo Samuel had 6 receptions for 72 receiving yards and a touchdown. Now, both of these teams are 2-2. I believe the Commanders wanted to continue to not rush Jaden Daniels back, and it was good probably that he missed these last 2 games. But going into week 5, where they have a pivotal matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers, who themselves just came off of a loss against the Giants, I wouldn't be surprised if Jaden Daniels returns in week 5 in that matchup. But for the Falcons, they needed to win this game and respond at a high level because that was an embarrassing loss that they suffered against the Panthers. No one saw that game coming, throwing up a donut, losing 30-0 to the Panthers in week 3, but this was a great response from them in this game and for Michael Penix Jr. to get a great dub, advancing the Falcons to a 500 record. It's Jackson Dart time indeed, and the Giants won an upset game over the Chargers, winning 21-18, getting their first win of the year, and the Chargers lost their first game of the year, moving on to a 3-1 record. The most tragic thing about this game, in my opinion, was seeing Malik Neighbors, who tore his ACL in this game. Everyone likes to talk about that MetLife Stadium and the turf and things of that nature too, man. It's crazy how many season-ending injuries that have happened on that field, and you just hate it from Malik Neighbors, who was going into his second year this year, having a great year so far. I think he's going to bounce back eventually, but it sucks that we aren't probably going to see him until the 2026 NFL season, but prayers for sure. But like I said, Jackson Dart had a great first start in this game, and it was time, man. I mean, Russell Wilson, no disrespect to him, and we know he had that crazy game against the Cowboys, but you know that was more so of an indictment on the Cowboys defense. But it was just time for Jackson Dart to get the reins, and he played solid in his first start, completed 13 out of his 20 passing attempts for 111 passing yards and 1 touchdown. Not necessarily throwing the ball too much. I think that's by design from Brian Daboll, just to try to be complimentary overall in the game from a running standpoint, but also complimenting the defense. And Cam Scatterbo, I think he continues to emerge as a running back 1. They drafted him in the 4th round, yes, but he's been great in his first few games, and he had 25 carries for 79 rushing yards. And then Jackson Dart in the running game too, though. That's a dual threat ability that he has provided at being a rookie quarterback. Had 10 carries for 54 rushing yards in that 15-yard rushing touchdown that he had. And Theo Johnson had a receiving touchdown. Darius Slayton had 3 receptions for 44 receiving yards. In their defense, they were really able to make it hard for Justin Herbert, forcing Herbert to throw 2 interceptions. He had been really one of the best quarterbacks in the league from a performance standpoint this season so far, but this is his first laying of an egg of a game this year, and the Chargers lost this one. They forced Herbert to drop back 41 times as well too. That's how you know they were able to make the team play catch up in a lot of instances. And I will say though, Amarion Hampton, he had a nice 50-yard rushing touchdown, and on the game he had 12 carries for 128 rushing yards and a touchdown, averaging 10.7 yards per carry. They're going to need a lot of great production out of him, their rookie first-round pick, as Najee Harris is out for the season, so shout out to him for that. And Quentin Johnson had 8 receptions for 98 receiving yards and a touchdown, but overall it wasn't enough to beat the New York Football Giants in this game and getting their first win of this 2025 NFL season. I think they're really reinvigorated now with Jackson Dart. The fans have been clamoring for it. I think Brian Daboll felt the pressure, and overall it was a great decision so far. I mean, of course he's a rookie, so he'll go through some pains, but I think this is the right move as well too, just to provide a spark, because the Giants, they've been hopeless for a while now. Ever since that 2022 season where they won a playoff game against the Vikings, making it to the divisional round, it's been very bleak, a terrible couple of seasons, but hopefully this can provide a spark to this team being more improved. And they got a good win over the Chargers, so I believe in Los Angeles, still one of the best teams in the AFC, but it's a great win for Jackson Dart in his first start, or what we can call the Jackson Dart era in New York. Someone had to win this matchup in the AFC South, and the Houston Texans definitely did, getting their first win of the season, blowing out the Tennessee Titans, winning 26-0, moving on to a 1-3 record. And the Tennessee Titans are now 0-4 without a win. And for the Texans, we've been waiting for a performance like this in terms of maybe not necessarily having the most offensive production, but taking care of your business, winning a game that you should have, because they really could have won that game in week 3 against Jacksonville, but nevertheless, they won this game, and their offense looked more improved. They played with a lot more tempo. Running wise, their rookie Woody Marks played solidly as well too, having 2 total touchdowns, 1 rushing, 1 receiving, having 17 carries for 69 rushing yards, and then receiving wise, having 50 receiving yards for that touchdown and 4 receptions. I liked what I saw from Nick Caley in the offense overall. CJ Stroud looked more composed outside of that Jeffrey Simmons sack, which was absolutely insane. That was crazy. He was there instantly with Stroud, but Stroud played good, completed 22 out of his 28 passing attempts, throwing for 233 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns. That went to Woody Marks, and the other one to rookie Jaden Higgins, getting his first receiving touchdown of his career. That was great for them. Nico Collins had 4 receptions for 79 receiving yards, and I just really like what I saw from the team. Even Nick Chubb had 13 carries for 47 rushing yards, so they were able to get a lot more balance out of their running game between Woody Marks and Nick Chubb, as they're still continuing to await the return of Joe Mixon. Shout out to the Texans offense getting things right, because we know from their defensive perspective, there's never been a question about their defense being still one of the best in the league, amidst of them starting 0-3 but now having a 1-3 record. And they were able to make life difficult for Cam Ward, who was very inefficient in this game, only completed 10 out of his 26 passing attempts for 108 passing yards, no touchdowns obviously because scored 0 points and had an interception off of a tip ball, but nevertheless still was picked off. Really, this team lacks playmakers, and that's crazy to say because Calvin really had a solid season last year, but for example, in this game, only had 2 receptions for 30 receiving yards. Our leading receiver was Alec Ayamanor, who had 2 receptions for 44 receiving yards. So they're just not great, kind of like what Cam Ward said right here.
I mean, if we keeping a buck right now, we ass.
And I mean, you can make the argument that they are right now. I mean, and not gonna lie, they definitely look like it. But it's a great win for the Texans. They're gonna play against the Ravens in Week 5, but maybe that's a more winnable game now, especially since it looks like Lamar Jackson is dealing with a hamstring injury, things to that nature. So hey, that could be winnable, especially if you're playing Cooper Rush at the quarterback position. But shout out to the Texans. Shout out to H-Town. I'm from the Houston area, of course, not a Texans fan though. But shout out to H-Town for getting their first dub of the 2025 NFL season. This game for the weekend was slated to be one of the best, and I guess from a finishing standpoint, it was, but at one point the Eagles were beating the Bucs 21-3, and they won this game 31-25, moving on to a 4-0 record as the Bucs got their first loss of the season in this game. And the Eagles, they continue to find ways to win. It might not be the most pretty, but I think their defense certainly dominated in this game. I mean, they had a few busted coverages, whether it was from a 70-yard touchdown from Bucky Irving or the same thing, a 70-yard receiving touchdown from Emeka Egbuka. Overall, they were able to hold things down and win the game, and they forced Baker Mayfield to a bad fourth quarter interception where the Bucs could have really tied up the game and made it more interesting, but Baker Mayfield threw a bad interception to Jihad Campbell. And overall from their offense though, they were very balanced. Jalen Hurts, he didn't throw for a lot of yards. Yes, I know he didn't, guys. He did play great in Week 4 though against the Rams in that comeback victory, but in this game he only completed 15 out of his 24 passing attempts, 130 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. Jalen Hurts though in the running game had 9 carries for 62 rushing yards. Saquon Barkley had a nice rushing touchdown after a fake tush push play was called. That provided the element of surprise for sure, so that was interesting to see. Dallas Goedert had 2 receiving touchdowns. Not necessarily too much going from Devontae Smith, and especially not AJ Brown, who only had 2 receptions for 7 receiving yards, but I believe Nick Sirianni, the head coach, Jalen Hurts, all of them don't care about stats, things of that nature too. The only stat that they care about is winning the game, and they've won 4 games this year and haven't lost any. They've won 20 times out of the last 21 games. I mean, that's an insane feat right there in itself. And for the Bucs though, I still believe they're one of the best teams in the NFL, not only the NFC, but the NFL. Like I said, besides that interception, Baker Mayfield, I mean, he had a solid game. Maybe not the most efficient from a completion percentage standpoint, completing 22 out of his 40 passing attempts for 289 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and that 1 pick. But I will say though, a lot of things that I continue to learn, and I think a lot of people in the NFL community continue to learn from watching the Buccaneers, is that Emeka Egbuka, man, he is a dog, guys. I mean, this is his 4th game, and he had 4 receptions for 101 receiving yards in that touchdown I talked about. Already has 4 receiving touchdowns this season in his rookie year. Playing great, man. And Bucky Irving, man, like I continue to talk about him as well when I talk about Tampa, continues to emerge as being one of the best running backs in the league. He had a combined 165 yards in this game, 63 rushing, and 102 receiving, as he had 5 receptions for 102 receiving yards in that touchdown I talked about with him. But it does suck that Mike Evans is injured and that he missed this game, because things certainly could have been different, but we'll never know. Chris Godwin returned in this game too and wasn't really too much of a factor, having 3 receptions for 26 receiving yards. But as I believe that he continues to ramp up, he'll be more of a threat in this offense and really get things going, especially when Mike Evans returns, because it'll have more attention off of him. But it was a great game from a finishing standpoint. The Eagles are still one of the lone undefeated teams in this league, and they'll have a great matchup in Week 5 as they'll play against the Denver Broncos. That'll be a really good one for sure. Patriots certainly put in this game, didn't they? They destroyed the Panthers in this matchup, winning 42-13, moving on to a 2-2 record. Now the Panthers are 1-3. And what I like to say from this game about the Patriots is that there was a lot of complimentary football in this game from Drake May, who completed 14 out of his 17 passing attempts, throwing for 203 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Not necessarily the greatest from a total yard standpoint in the running game, but Travion Henderson had a rushing touchdown, Antonio Gibson had a rushing touchdown, and Drake May himself had a rushing touchdown too, so love to see that. And Stephon Diggs came to play in this game, had 6 receptions for 101 receiving yards, and Hunter Henry and Mac Hollins, both of them had receiving touchdowns. Just great production from their weapons in this Patriots offense, getting Mike Vrabel his 2nd dub as the Patriots head coach. And their defense came to play in this game, even forcing the Panthers to have to put in Andy Dalton in this game. Maybe that's just a similar thing to what the Falcons did with Michael Penix Jr. and Kirk Cousins in Week 3, since it was a blowout. But nevertheless, though, the Patriots dominated in this game, and I'll continue to say it. I believe that this Patriots team, they have the potential to win, I believe. I think the floor for them is 8 games. I think they can win 9 games this year, and they could be, if the cards stack up in their favor, they could be a wild card team. But if not this year, I think next year they will be. But overall, this team is talented on both sides of the football, and I believe definitely they got this win for their defensive coordinator Terrell Williams as he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. So shout out to the Patriots getting this great dub, winning 42-13 over the Carolina Panthers. Similar to the Philadelphia Eagles, the Buffalo Bills are now 4-0, and the Saints, like a team like the Titans, are now 0-4. But in this matchup though, the Buffalo Bills won 31-19, and that score really doesn't indicate how close this game was for a lot of instances of the game. And shout out to the Saints defense. I mean, they turned over Josh Allen, even though I believe that Josh Allen still had a solid game. The Saints were able to not get embarrassed besides the trick play interception that happened that Chris Olave tried to throw. But Spencer Rattler, he's continued to be not the reason why the Saints lose the game, I would say. Not necessarily the best game from a passing standpoint, but he did complete 18 out of his 27 passing attempts in this game, going for 126 passing yards and a touchdown that he had. Kendra Miller, who had 11 receptions for 65 receiving yards and a touchdown, and Chris Olave, who had only 3 receptions for 20 receiving yards, but he did score a touchdown. And Alvin Kamara in the running game had 15 carries for 70 rushing yards. The Saints, they were solid and balanced, but the better team won. The Bills played great, especially a James Cook, who I believe, besides Josh Allen, continues to be really an MVP for this team. Had 22 carries for 117 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. He also had 18 receiving yards added in too. Josh Allen completed 16 out of his 22 passing attempts for 209 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and had 1 interception. And Josh Allen also had a rushing touchdown too, so 3 total touchdowns. Then Khalil Shakir had 5 receptions for 69 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. And Dalton Kincaid had a receiving touchdown too. So just overall, I think a really good game. A game, I guess, from Buffalo's perspective to remind them not to get comfortable because it's any given Sunday type of mentality, but they were able to win this game against the New Orleans Saints, moving on to, like I said, a 4-0 record, continuing to be one of the best teams in the league overall. In week 6, they'll play against the Patriots, a divisional game there. That should be really good too. So shout out to the Bills for getting a good W, and hopefully for the Saints perspective, they're able to get a win soon. I mean, they play against the Giants in week 5, so that might not be an easy one either, but it was a good win for the Buffalo Bills. I think it's safe to say that week 1 game that the Lions played against the Packers, we can assess that as a team just not being ready to play, because these past few games, after they blew out the Bears, put a statement beating the Ravens in week 3, and then killing the Browns in this game, winning 34-10, the Lions of old, the Lions that we've come accustomed to the past couple of years, are back, and they were overall explosive as we're used to them being, and really a physical football team as we continue to see. I mean, we saw in that matchup against the Ravens how they imposed their will against the Ravens defense, and in this game it was similar, maybe not from a total yards perspective, but still, Jahmyr Gibbs dominating the running game, having 15 carries for 91 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. David Montgomery, it wasn't necessarily his game, but that's what you see from this dynamic team of the Lions from an offensive perspective. Sonic and Knuckles, as they call Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Montgomery had a great game against the Ravens, and Jahmyr Gibbs played great in that game too, but Jahmyr Gibbs dominated in this one. So, I mean, really, it's picking your poison with this team. And passing wise, they didn't necessarily play the greatest. I mean, Jared Goff only threw for 168 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Kind of credit to the Browns, who still have a great defense, but overall, like I said, their offense is going to be the biggest thing that slows them down. But the Lions, they were still able to get into their weapons, like an Amon-Ra St. Brown, who continues to have a great start to this year, having 7 receptions for 70 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. And then Jameson Williams had a couple of explosive plays, 2 receptions for 40 receiving yards too, and Khalif Raymond. But I think the biggest story for the Lions is their continued defensive performance. Last week we saw them sack Lamar Jackson 7 times. In this game, a player like a DJ Reed got an interception. Kirby Joseph also got an interception too. Aiden Hutchinson had 2 sacks in this game. It's safe to say that he's definitely back. They've just been playing great under their first-year defensive coordinator and Kelvin Shepard, who learned under Aaron Glenn, and they played great in this matchup. Offensively, like I said, besides Quinshon Judkins, who has been a great boost to this offense overall in the running game, in this game as he had 21 carries for 82 rushing yards and a touchdown, they haven't done anything. Like, their offense is just awful to watch. Their leading receiver in this game was Isaiah Bond, who had 3 receptions for 58 receiving yards. Jerry Jeudy only had 3 receptions for 48 receiving yards too. Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say that in this matchup, the Lions took care of business as we mostly expected. I think the Browns took a lot of people off guard as they upsetted the Green Bay Packers in week 3, but reality came to set in and the Lions won this game, rightfully so, advancing to a 3-1 record. And now the Browns are 1-3.
Jaguars 26 and the 49ers 21.
This game was a great win for the Jacksonville Jaguars as they defeated the San Francisco 49ers 26-21, now having a 3-1 record, and this was the 49ers' first loss of the season as they are now also 3-1. Props to Liam Cohen, man. I think he's really revitalizing this offense, making it a run-first type of team that really complements the Trevor Lawrence, who I believe that he has really unlocked Travis Etienne Jr. a lot after last year. He didn't necessarily have a great year. In this performance against the 49ers, Travis Etienne had 19 carries for 124 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. We still haven't necessarily seen Brian Thomas Jr. get fully unlocked this season, but he did have 5 receptions for 49 receiving yards too, just helping things out. And then Hunter Long had a receiving touchdown. But man, their team has been hooping overall, and they've been playing some great complementary football. They're looking similar to the team that we saw in 2022 from a defensive perspective that helped that Jaguars team make the playoffs. And Trevor Lawrence, he didn't necessarily light the world on fire in this matchup, but he played solid, completing 21 out of his 31 passing attempts for 174 passing yards and a passing touchdown. Then you look at defensively, Devin Lloyd had 2 interceptions in this game, turning over Brock Purdy twice in his first game back after he only played in week 1. And Eric Armstead added in a sack as well too. Their defense looks really good right now, man. And after, I would say, a less than stellar win against the Texans in week 3, but nevertheless it was still a win, they really responded and played great overall. And Brock Purdy, man, like I said, this is his second game of the season after missing the past couple due to toe and shoulder injuries. And like I said, it kind of looked like it. He was a little bit rusty, completing 22 out of his 38 passing attempts for 309 passing yards. Those 2 picks and those 2 touchdowns, as I mentioned. Running wise, they weren't really too effective. Christian McCaffrey only had 17 carries for 49 rushing yards, averaging less than 3 yards per carry, and Brian Robinson Jr. only had 21 rushing yards on 5 carries. Not a lot going there though. I will say though, Christian McCaffrey though, receiving wise, as we know that he's a great threat not only in the rushing game but receiving wise too. He had 6 receptions for 92 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown, being their leading receiver. And Jake Tongs had 3 receptions for 58 receiving yards and a touchdown. But I believe they're still feeling the presence of Brandon Ayuk not being there as it continues to reach a year since he tore his ACL. They need more explosion to this offense. They need George Kittle back desperately too. I think that's a huge problem as well. And I think that they'll get things going, but to an extent of how much, I'm not sure, especially with Nick Bosa being out for the season with a torn ACL, being their defensive anchor and their best player. But it was a great win, and I think for a lot of people, a surprising win that the Jacksonville Jaguars had over the San Francisco 49ers, getting their 3rd win of the season. People might say that this was a coming back to reality type of game for Daniel Jones, but I'll say not necessarily, as the Colts, they could have won this game if Aiden Mitchell didn't have that touchback touchdown, which sucked, man. You never know, this game could have went differently, but the Los Angeles Rams beat the Indianapolis Colts, winning 27-20. Now both of these teams having 3-1 records, and it was a great matchup. If anything, I think that we learned about the Rams is they're continuing to be one of the best teams in the league. But this shows, in my opinion, even though they lost, the Colts are still a real team, and it's early, like I always say, especially after week 4, but it was a great matchup, man. And Daniel Jones, yes, he didn't have the greatest game. This was his worst game of the season so far, as he completed 24 out of his 33 passing attempts, efficient there, throwing for 262 passing yards, but only throwing 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. Not a great ratio at all. But their team still had opportunities to win, like I said. If Aiden Mitchell would have scored that touchdown, things would have for sure been differently. Jonathan Taylor, he's been explosive throughout the season so far, but in this game, to a lesser extent, the Rams defensive line was able to limit him as he only had 17 carries for 76 rushing yards. Aiden Mitchell could have added a touchdown to this performance, as he did have 3 receptions for 96 receiving yards, but that touchback did happen. Tyler Warren had a rushing touchdown, and Michael Pittman Jr. had 5 receptions for 41 receiving yards and a touchdown too. So it was a great gritty game between both squads. Love this matchup going into it, and it was a great finish as well too, as Matthew Stafford hit Tutu Atwell for a game-winning receiving touchdown at the end. That was just a great finish to a great game. And Matthew Stafford, I mean, he played really great in this matchup after having a less than stellar performance against the Eagles in week 3. He completed 29 out of his 41 passing attempts for 375 passing yards and 3 touchdowns, one going to Tutu Atwell, as I mentioned, to win the game, to Devontae Adams as well too, and then to Puka Nacua, who dominated the Colts secondary in this matchup, having 13 receptions for 170 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. Shout out to Puka, man. He has been hooping this year. And then Kyron Williams in the running game had 13 carries for 77 rushing yards too. Just a great game from the Rams. Like I said, Cameron Curl, he picked off Daniel Jones 2 times. Jared Verse had a sack. Byron Young had a sack. Just a lot of great intensity from this Rams team, who got a bounce back win after blowing a 26-7 lead against the Eagles in week 3. They got a great bounce back win in week 4 against the Indianapolis Colts. In Las Vegas, we have a game where the Chicago Bears beat the Las Vegas Raiders, winning 25-24, getting their 2nd win in the Ben Johnson era, moving on to a 2-2 record. And now the Las Vegas Raiders fall to a 1-3 record, and it's really a tale of 2 halves. Very physical football being played. Ultimately, the Raiders had a chance to win the game with a field goal at the end, but they got blocked. That's been a theme for the past couple of weeks, and blocked field goals in week 4, also of course in week 3. But the Bears won this game, and I believe that Caleb Williams, I mean, he didn't play terrible. He just came off of his greatest game as a pro so far against the Dallas Cowboys in week 3. But in this game, he completed 22 out of his 37 passing attempts for 212 passing yards, a touchdown, 1 interception. In my opinion, and I believe that DJ Moore is a great receiver, a really good receiver in this league. But it's pretty apparent and obvious that Rome Odunze is Caleb Williams' favorite target. Both got drafted the same year, things of that nature too. They have a great rapport. And you saw that even furthermore in this game against Las Vegas, as Odunze had 4 receptions for 69 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. Cole Kmet had 3 receptions for 46 receiving yards. And DJ Moore only had 4 receptions for 38 receiving yards. So like I said, the theme is Rome Odunze being utilized a lot in his Ben Johnson offense. And also DeAndre Swift had a rushing touchdown too. But I think the defense really made a huge difference for the Bears, and that's what really helped them win the game. And I think Geno Smith has been very up and down, but more so down this year. This is the 2nd second game this season that he has had 3 interceptions in a game. In this game against the Bears, had 3 picks, and also against the Chargers a couple weeks ago, he had 3 picks in this matchup, and he didn't play great at all. Completed 14 yards, 21 passing attempts. That's the only efficient area of this game for Geno, as he had 117 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 picks. I will say though, I've been begging for Chip Kelly, the offensive coordinator for the Raiders, and Pete Carroll on the Raiders overall, to get Ashton Jeanty utilized and going, and he definitely did in this matchup. He finally got over 20 carries, had 21 carries for 138 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, including that touchdown, which was a 64 rushing touchdown. Love that. Brock Bowers only had 5 receptions for 46 receiving yards too, but like I mentioned though, man, the Raiders, they were set up, even amidst Geno Smith having all those turnovers. They could have won this game, but the Bears clutched it out, and special teams, all 3 phases of the game, offense, defense, and special teams playing complementary football, it made a huge difference for the Bears, and they were able to win this matchup. And I believe this Bears team, I mean, they can really be solid. I've said it before, this team was 4-2 last year before they had a colossal collapse after they lost that Hail Mary game against the Washington Commanders. They were 4-2 before that. So this team, they'll be improved. We're seeing that the past couple of weeks after starting 0-2, they got 2 wins in a row. Shout out to the Bears, but for the Raiders, man, I thought this team was going to be improved, and I guess they are in some instances under Pete Carroll, but it's not looking great right now at all. And they have a 1-3 record, but it's a great win for the Chicago Bears. This was viewed to be a very anticipated matchup between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens, but ultimately, really, the Chiefs blew out the Ravens in this game, winning 37-20. And I know some people will say Lamar Jackson got hurt in the game. Dude, it was 30-13 when that happened. Really, the Chiefs just dominated, and it continues to show that the Ravens arguably have one of the worst defenses in the league right now. I mean, I don't even know if it's arguable. That's just really a fact. They've allowed 133 points in 4 games so far. They've had a lot of turnovers, including with Lamar Jackson having a fumble and an interception. It's not great at all right now, man. And I haven't seen so far in the John Harbaugh era them have this type of collapses in terms of from a defensive perspective, not being complimentary at all. And you saw that in the game. I mean, Lamar Jackson only had 147 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick, completing 14 out of his 20 passing attempts. And we'll see how severe the hamstring injury, whatever injury it was that he had, did Cooper Rush just come in the game because it was essentially over. We'll see. I don't know, but it didn't look great. Derrick Henry also only had 8 carries for 42 rushing yards, so that's something to look at there. Justice Hill had 3 carries for 76 rushing yards and a touchdown too, so he provided some jolt most definitely. But besides Zay Flowers and Justice Hill having a receiving touchdown as well too, they really didn't get anything going from a passing standpoint. Zay Flowers had 7 receptions for 74 receiving yards, and Justice Hill had that receiving touchdown with 5 receptions and 41 receiving yards. But man, the Ravens, the reality of them is that they're 1-3 right now, and the Chiefs, they're 2-2. After all things haven't looked great with their offense, they finally got Xavier Worthy back, and you saw immediately the type of impact that this Chiefs offense has with and without him on the field, and they still have a reinforcement coming back around week 7 with Rashee Rice after serving his suspension. But Xavier Worthy had 5 receptions for 83 receiving yards. Hollywood Brown had a receiving touchdown, Juju Smith-Schuster did, and Isaiah Pacheco did as well too. And Patrick Mahomes was efficient. This was his first 4 touchdown passing game since October of the 2023 season. Crazy to say that, but regardless of the situation, this was a really good performance from Pat Mahomes. Completed 25 out of his 37 passing attempts for 270 passing yards and those 4 touchdowns. So I think it's safe to say that the Chiefs, they're getting back into rhythm as they get more healthy. Their offense will continue to look better. Tyquan Thornton has also been a player who had a receiving touchdown in this game too. That's continued to hold things down for them while Xavier Worthy was out. And with him on the field too, it just opens up their offense a little bit more. And when Rashee Rice returns, that'll also be another additional threat. So Chiefs got a good win in this matchup, continuing to beat the Baltimore Ravens again. And for the Ravens, man, they got to get right, man, defensively and just overall, because it's not looking good right now. They play against the Texans in week 5, a winnable matchup for sure, depending on the status of Lamar Jackson. But we'll see how things go. But it's a great win for Kansas City. This game was really the most high anticipated game of the season so far, I would argue, in a matchup between the Dallas Cowboys and the Green Bay Packers. And it ended in a tie, of course, 40-40. Have a lot of things to talk about from this game, but I'll try to keep it as concise as possible. Both offenses really highlighted this game, and it's funny to me, really, I saw even going into this game objectively, I thought people were really counting out the Cowboys too much. We've seen the Dallas Cowboys have one of the best offenses in the league, one of the worst defenses, yes, but I knew that their offense was going to come to play. Even without a CD Lamb, and you saw that in full effect, and Dak Prescott continues to have a great season so far. Just really building on the narrative even more that when the Dallas Cowboys have Dak Prescott starting in lineup, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league, at least from a regular season standpoint. And in this game, he dominated, completing 31 out of his 40 passing attempts for 319 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. George Pickens really shined in this game, as he had his best game as a Cowboy so far, having 8 receptions for 134 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns, now having 4 total receiving touchdowns on the season so far. A lot of distributing in this game from Dallas Cowboys playmakers in the absence of CD Lamb. Jalen Tolbert had 4 receptions for 61 receiving yards, including that huge reception in overtime. Jake Ferguson had 7 receptions for 40 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown touchdown. His first receiving touchdown since the 2023 playoffs where they lost to Green Bay in that wild card playoff game. Then you look in the running game, man, Javonte Williams has really rejuvenated himself in the season as a Dallas Cowboys so far. In this matchup, he had 20 carries for 85 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, averaging 4.2 yards per carry. I think that he should be the lead back for the Dallas Cowboys, and he should really be playing like 85% of the snaps unless he is tired and needs some more juice. And it begs the question of when they're going to activate Jadon Blue, the rookie running back that they drafted in the 5th round. But Javonte has been impressive, and the offense for the Dallas Cowboys has been one of the best in the league, like I said. Then you talk about the Packers real quick, where they had a great offensive game too. Just had that lone turnover with a strip sack that Jordan Love had right before halftime, but Jordan Love was solid, completing 31 out of his 43 passing attempts for 337 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. Josh Jacobs had 86 rushing yards on 22 carries and a rushing touchdown too. And Romeo Doubs, I think he was the top playmaker for them, as he had 6 receptions for 58 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. Maybe not the most from a yard standpoint, but he was able to make great plays and had huge receptions to, like I said, get those 3 touchdowns. And Josh Jacobs was vital in the receiving game as well too, as he had 4 receptions for 71 receiving yards in himself. So like I said, a lot of offense in this game, and I think at the end in overtime we saw some poor execution from the Green Bay Packers, honestly. And if Jack Sanborn's back didn't hit the ball with 1 second remaining, the Dallas Cowboys would have had a 2-2 record. But overall, nevertheless, it didn't happen. This game resulted in a tie. I think it's really unfulfilling, I would say, especially, you know, all the narrative, the storyline about Micah Parsons going into this game to return to Dallas. And let's be real, can we be honest, guys? That sack was not a sack on Dak that Micah Parsons had. Whatever, man. It was a tackle, so I guess they counted as that. But the Cowboys, they were able to really take him out the game. They sent a lot of chippers. Of course, you had to send the double teams. And, you know, usually in different matchups for the Packers, it's a great thing because they have Rashawn Gary, Edgerrin Cooper. But a lot of those players weren't necessarily the biggest factors. And Micah Parsons in his return to Dallas had 8 pressures, yes. And I think pressures is a very overrated stats. I mean, yes, you're getting the pressure, but are you finishing the play all the time? No, because he only had that 1 quote-unquote sack and a 34.5% pass rush win rate against the Dallas Cowboys offensive line, who already had their center Cooper Beebe and their rookie first-round pick Tyler Booker out in this game, but also Tyler Guyton suffered a concussion in this game, and their backup Nate Thomas actually played solid against Micah Parsons. So I don't know. A lot of people expected a Green Bay domination, but that's the opposite of what happened. And I think what we really learned from this game is that definitely from an offensive perspective, I think so. The Cowboys are still trying to get things together on defense. They still have people like DeMarvion Overshown who need to return. Their rookie Shavon Revel, but shout out to Jadeveon Clowney in his Cowboys debut. He played solid. But I think we learned from this game that the Cowboys collectively, and they're still going to improve defensively, that they're better than what people say. That the Packers, they're a good team. They are one of the best teams in the NFC. But in my opinion, I still believe that the Packers are not as great and as unbeatable as people say that they are. But it was a really great matchup nevertheless, even though we didn't have a winner. And Green Bay Packers moved to a 2-1-1 record, and the Dallas Cowboys now have a 1-2-1 record. Now moving to the final night of NFL Week 4, we had a Monday Night Football doubleheader where, let's be real, it wasn't necessarily 2 stellar matchups, but we did have a solid game between the Miami Dolphins and the New York Jets, and the Dolphins got their first win of the year, winning 27-21, and the Jets remain one of the few winless teams in the NFL, moving to an 0-4 record. And I think really, yes, the Dolphins win, and we'll talk about the game ad nauseum in terms of from a statistical and analyzation standpoint, but prayers up to Tyreek Hill, who dislocated his knee in this game, a nasty injury for sure, and that's going to make things even more difficult for the Dolphins, losing their best playmaker and one of the best receivers in the league. But at least they were finally able to get a win in this game. They played efficient football. Tua Tagovailoa played clean, no interceptions, completed 17 out of his 25 passing attempts for 177 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns to, out of all people, a Darren Waller, who was activated this week in Week 4 for the Dolphins and played great in his first game since the 2023 NFL season after retiring as a member of the New York Giants. In this matchup, Darren Waller had 3 receptions for 27 receiving yards, not necessarily the most receiving yards, but had 2 receiving touchdowns. And Tyreek Hill, before he got injured, had 6 receptions for 67 receiving yards, and Jalen Waddle had 3 receptions for 48 receiving yards too. So a good win for this Dolphins team, who really capitalized off of the Jets' turnovers. In the opening drive for the Jets, they were about to score a touchdown. Braylon Allen fumbled. Justin Fields had a fumble. This team also in New York for the Jets was penalized at a high level too. It was just disgusting to watch. And after a couple of good games that the Jets put on tape in terms of teams that they lost to, even though they lost and still haven't had a win, there was some encouragement. This game was not encouraging at all. And I will say Justin Fields, he had a nice rushing touchdown. He also completed 20 out of his 27 passing attempts for 226 passing yards, 1 passing touchdowns, and like I mentioned, 81 rushing yards on 7 carries for the rushing touchdown. But besides that, man, and besides Garrett Wilson, who had an amazing receiving touchdown in the 4th quarter, as he had 6 receptions for 82 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown, and their rookie Mason Taylor had 5 receptions for 65 receiving yards. This Jets team, man, is still in a lot of disarray and has a lot of discipline problems. So that's the biggest takeaway from the Jets right now. And they play the Dallas Cowboys in Week 5, and playing against the Dak Prescott, who arguably is in the MVP conversation and playing at a high level at the position position right now. It's going to only continue to get tougher for the Jets. So still one of the winless teams in the league, but the Dolphins, they finally got a good win, and unfortunately they lost Tyreek Hill, but they were able to win this one for him and for Mike McDaniel. Now, this final game of NFL Week 4 on Monday Night Football was worse between the Denver Broncos and the Cincinnati Bengals, and it was just really a full example of as the Broncos whooped the Bengals, winning 28-3. Both of these teams now have 2-2 records, and I think this is going to be the start of a huge downfall for the Cincinnati Bengals. We all knew that things were going to be tough and difficult without Joe Burrow, as he had that turf toe injury, and with Jake Browning starting. But a couple of years ago, Jake Browning played at least a little competent. Now it's just been the definition of rough. The Bengals had less than 200 yards of total offense compared to the Broncos, who had over 500 yards of offense in this game. I mean, a huge discrepancy between both squads. And like I said, it's only going to get tougher for the Bengals. They have to play against the Lions in Week 5, the Packers in Week 6, the Steelers in Week 7. I mean, are we already looking at 2-5 after those 3 games? I think that's very possible. But the Broncos overall dominating this game from a defensive perspective. We know they have one of the best defenses in the league. They sacked Drake Browning 3 times. Only allowed a total of 125 passing yards. Jamar Chase only had 23 receiving yards. Their leading receiver was T. Higgins with 3 receptions for 32 receiving yards. I mean, they had nothing going. Pat Surtain, Riley Moss, a lot of their secondary, and we already know what their front 7 or defensive line put the Bengals offense on clamps. And offensively for the Broncos, Bo Nix had a really good game besides the interception. He completed 29 out of his 42 passing attempts for 326 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. And J.K. Dobbins was very physical in this matchup. The Broncos really imposed their will in the running game, but Dobbins had 16 carries for 101 rushing yards. Marvin Mims Jr. had a rushing touchdown, and Bo Nix had a rushing touchdown himself. Then Cortland Sutton dominated in the receiving game too, having 5 receptions for 81 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. And Marvin Mims had 69 receiving yards on 6 receptions too. So overall, just a complete and balanced game from this Broncos team, who got things back on track after losing tough games against the Colts and the Chargers very narrowly. They're looking like the team that a lot of people predicted to have a shot to not only win the AFC West, breaking the Chiefs' nearly 10-year streak of winning the division. Even though both teams are still trailing the Chargers, they're still one of those teams I think that's going to be in the mix after having a 10-7 season last year and making the wild card round of the AFC playoffs in 2024. So it was a great win for the Broncos, and for the Bengals, man, things are looking very rough and very frustrated, and a lot of things are in limbo in Cincinnati. So what have we learned so far from Week 4 and ultimately at this point in the NFL season? That we still largely don't know a lot about these teams. Everyone was ready to hand the Lombardi Trophy to the Green Bay Packers after they defeated the Lions and the Commanders in both of those games. Then they lost to the Browns, and they tied with the Cowboys in this Week 4 matchup. That's why you just have to slow down on teams. A lot of people think that the Ravens now, with Lamar Jackson potentially maybe missing time, we're still not sure about the full diagnosis on his hamstring, that their season could be lost. All things to that nature too. Guys, it's still very early. We play 4 games of football right now. Teams are finally getting their bye week next week. I mean, it's still very early. Now, I will say, if your team is winless like the Saints, the Titans, or the Jets, that's a different thing. Not gonna lie. Those seasons could be close to being lost. But for other teams, man, it's a lot to be going, and we've seen a lot of injuries, unfortunately. Tyreek Hill this week, Malik Neighbors last week, Nick Bosa, a lot of key players. Nnamdi Madubuike, defensive tackle for the Ravens, out for the season now. So yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of adversity. That's just the reality of the game. And unfortunately, reality also is that there's a lot of injuries too. So we don't know a lot about these teams yet, guys. And after the first couple weeks of the season too, people were ready to say, oh, the Chiefs, they're done. They're not Super Bowl contenders anymore. They're already 2-2, and they dominated the Baltimore Ravens in Week 4. So we still don't know a lot. The Cowboys too, they're a team I know that a lot of people either love them or hate them too. We still don't know a lot about them either. They have the #1 offense in terms of yards per game, and they have the 32nd, the worst ranked defense in the league too. And I will say they have more defensive reinforcements on the way too. But you have to talk about Dak Prescott. He's playing at a high level too. George Pickens had a great game in that matchup too, and they still don't have CeeDee Lamb back yet. So we're just learning a lot from both teams in the NFC and AFC. The Lions are dominating. The Seahawks look nice in the NFC West division, so do the Rams. The Colts, even though they lost their first game, I still think that they're solid. And Daniel Jones is playing really efficient football, and Shane Steichen is the coach of the year watch so far. But like I said, it's still very early. Teams have still 13 more games to play. Let's calm down and relax and stop acting like we know everything about this year so far, because we don't. And we can't just say that teams are just completely out of it that we thought are contenders, because it's still very early in the season. I mean, it's just now about to be October here soon. Like, let's relax. But with that being said though, guys, let me know what y'all learned from NFL Week 4 and some of the games that you're looking forward to in NFL Week 5. A lot of content coming here on the way, so stay tuned for that. Like I mentioned in the intro a little bit earlier, we're about to start doing NBA season previews, not for all 30 teams, but for the most relevant and contending teams teams, so stay tuned for that for sure. Hopefully starting this week with the Oklahoma City Thunder. Yes, Sirski. But these first 4 weeks of the NFL season have been pleasant for sure and amazing to see, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the season. And stay tuned for the power rankings video that we'll have coming soon as well, going into NFL Week 5 that we have weekly, so stay tuned for that for sure. With all that out the way and being said, guys, make sure that you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. Follow me on Instagram / Twitter and X at Swaggy Russ and TikTok at Swaggy Russ 2 for shorts, reels, content, all things to that nature. As I continuously say, a lot more content, great heat, and things of that nature on the way, guys. Y'all keep being blessed. Notice you are loved, you are chosen. God has so many great purposes for you and everyone in your life. Continue to be prayed up. Keep Jesus Christ at the center of your life always. And y'all be blessed. Love y'all. And y'all have a good one. Peace.